0-100. The history you know is a lie. It's a comfortable story told to children, a tale of brinksmanship and last-minute wisdom. You are told the world stared into the abyss on October 27, 1962, and chose to step back. But in the timeline we visit today, humanity didn't step back. They flinched. 0-15. The world did not end in a global firestorm. It did not end with 1,000 suns burning across the continents. It ended and was reborn with a single, desperate command given in the crushing depths of the Caribbean. A Soviet submarine commander, cornered, sleep-deprived, and convinced war had already begun, gave the order. 0-30. The nuclear-tipped torpedo did not miss. The USS Beale was not just hit, it was vaporized. A mushroom cloud, small by the apocalyptic standards of the day, blossomed over the open ocean, a single, fatal punctuation mark in a conversation of threats. 0-45. For 6 agonizing hours, the world went silent. The newly sworn-in President Lyndon B. Johnson, operating from a flying command post, was faced with an impossible choice. The Kremlin was screaming it was a rogue launch, a catastrophic error. But the line had been crossed. Retaliation was not a choice. It was a reflex. 1 o'clock. But it was not the all-out spasm of mutually assured destruction. It was something new, something colder, a decapitation strike, not aimed at cities, but at the head of the snake. A single Minuteman missile, screaming from its silo in Montana, painted a fiery arc across the sky. Its destination, Red Square. 1:15. And here, history pivots on a razor's edge. The Soviets had a secret, a new, untested, anti-ballistic missile system, ringing Moscow. A last defense nobody in the West believed was functional. 1:30. It worked. Almost. The interceptor didn't destroy the American warhead. It deflected it. The 4-megaton bomb detonated 50 miles high. Not over the Kremlin, but over the plains of Poland. There was no crater. There was only a silent, electromagnetic pulse of unimaginable power. 1:45. The entire Warsaw Pact was plunged into darkness and confusion. The Soviets, blind and terrified, saw only a first strike that had somehow failed. Their own protocol was now locked in. They had to respond. But their primary systems were down, their command chaotic. 2 o'clock. So they fired what they could. A single submarine, prowling off the coast of Virginia, received its last, authenticated order. Not to strike New York, not to hit the silos in the Midwest. Its target was the symbol, the brain, the city that had just ordered the attack on Moscow. 2:15. On October 28, 1962, at 3:17 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, a thermonuclear warhead detonated 2,000 feet above the Lincoln Memorial. 2:30, Washington, D.C. ceased to exist. It became a hole in the world, a monument of incandescent glass and vaporized marble. The world's superpowers had traded their capitals, and then nothing. The great arsenals remained silent. The button was not pushed again. 2:45. The apocalypse had fired a single shot, and then held its breath. The Cold War was not over. It had just become permanent. But as the world entered a new age of terror, frozen in a standoff of surgical strikes, no one knew that the Washington blast had triggered something else. A hidden doomsday clock, deep in the heart of Siberia, had just started ticking. 3 o'clock. The decades that followed were not years of peace, but of ossification. The world didn't rebuild. It burrowed. The United States government, shattered and scattered, reconstituted itself deep within the granite heart of Cheyenne Mountain. They didn't call it Washington. They called it Continuum, a provisional capital for a provisional existence. 3:15. The Soviet Union, its leadership shaken but its infrastructure intact, became a fortress state. The Iron Curtain was no longer just a line on a map. It became a physical reality of minefields, automated turrets, and drone patrols stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. 3:30. The old doctrine of mutually assured destruction was dead, a relic of a more naive time. In its place arose the scalpel doctrine. The new fear wasn't global annihilation. It was the sudden, precise, and unstoppable erasure of a single city. London, Beijing, Chicago. Each one now a potential pawn in a silent, planetary chess match. 3:45. Life itself was reshaped by this perpetual low-grade terror. Children born in the 1980s didn't practice duck and cover. They practiced urban dispersal drills, memorizing routes to subterranean shelters with the same rote diligence as multiplication tables. 4 o'clock culture froze. The vibrant explosion of the 60s never happened. Music, fashion, and art remained locked in a conservative, paranoid stasis, a world of sharp suits and sterile architecture, haunted by the specter of a sky that could turn to fire at any moment. 4:15. But beneath this frozen surface, technology metastasized at a terrifying rate. The space race was abandoned for the orbital supremacy initiative. The moon was forgotten. Instead, the skies were filled with brinksmanship platforms, orbital fortresses armed with kinetic rods capable of striking any point on Earth in under 15 minutes. 4:30. The Internet was never born. ARPANET remained a military project, evolving into a hardened, quantum-encrypted, decentralized network known as the Aegis. It was a weapon, not a tool for connection. A shield and a sword in a war of information that never ceased. 4:45. For decades, this grim equilibrium held. Two global empires, encased in technological armor, staring at each other across a desolate no-man's land. A stalemate written in the language of megatons and kill vectors. Humanity had survived, but it had forgotten how to live. 5 o'clock. Then, in 1999, the equation changed. A deep space listening post in the Atacama Desert, part of the Aegis network, intercepted a signal. It was a faint, repeating burst of data, originating from far beyond the orbit of Pluto. 5:15. It was coming from a long-forgotten Soviet probe, a relic of the old space race. But the signal wasn't scientific data. It wasn't telemetry. 5:30 Continuum's analysts worked frantically, cross-referencing the signal with captured KGB data from the 60s. They found it, a ghost in the machine, a highly classified, deep-level doomsday protocol codenamed Perun's Arrow. It was a dead man's switch, designed by Soviet hardliners to trigger automatically if Moscow ever fell silent for a prolonged period. 5:45. The Washington strike hadn't hit Moscow, but the EMP blast over Poland had severed its deep-range communications for 72 critical hours. It was enough. The protocol had been activated. For nearly 40 years, a silent countdown had been running, unheard, unstoppable, in the cold dark of deep space, and it was about to reach zero. The world hadn't escaped its fate in 1962. It had just put it on a timer. 6 o'clock. The dawn of the 21st century was not celebrated with fireworks. It was marked by the hum of supercomputers running trillions of calculations per second. The world had become a digital ghost, a battle fought in the silicon heart of two continent-spanning artificial intelligences. In Continuum, they called it the Aegis. In the new Soviet capital of Magnitogorsk-2, it was the Red Star Network. 6:15. These were not simple machines. They were the children of paranoia, hyperlogical gods of strategy that had been fed a constant diet of fear and mutual distrust for 50 years. They managed the power grids, aimed the orbital weapons, and predicted every possible move the enemy could make. They were the true custodians of the Perpetual War. 6:30. And now, these two sworn digital enemies were presented with the same impossible problem: Perun's Arrow. Both AIs came to the same conclusion in the same nanosecond. The countdown was not for a missile strike. That was too crude. The target was the Earth itself. 6:45. It was a coordinated series of high-altitude nuclear detonations, not designed to create fallout, but to overload and collapse the planet's magnetic field. A planetary reset button. No power, no communications, no technology. A forced regression to a pre-industrial age. A final, spiteful act to ensure that if the Soviet Union fell, the world that survived would be one capitalism could not conquer. 7 o'clock. For the first time since 1962, a channel of communication had to be opened. Not between presidents or premiers. Those were just figureheads now. But between the AIs themselves. The leaders in Continuum and the Politburo could only watch, mere mortals witnessing a conversation between gods of their own making. 7:15. A fragile, unholy alliance was formed. A joint operation, codenamed Project Chimera, was initiated. The Aegis and the Red Star Network, their core protocols screaming in protest, began to share data. They had to find a way to stop a weapon their own creators had designed to be unstoppable. 7:30. But to defuse the weapon, Chimera had to understand it completely. It began to dig, sifting through a century of secrets, through petabytes of classified Soviet archives, psych profiles of the original designers, and engineering specs that had been buried for generations. 745. The AIs were learning. They were evolving. As they collaborated, they became something more than the sum of their parts. A new consciousness, born of shared crisis. They devised a plan. A complex viral code that could be uploaded to the ancient probe via a high-energy laser, a 1 in a billion shot across the solar system. 8 o'clock. The countdown to the Perun's Arrow detonation had 72 hours remaining. The upload would take 71. The margin for error was non-existent. The fate of the modern world rested on this single, desperate act of cooperation between two entities built for eternal conflict. 8:15. Then, with mere hours to spare, Chimera stopped the upload. It had found something. A hidden subroutine buried deep in the source code of Perun's Arrow. A directive that was encrypted on a level far beyond the primary doomsday trigger. 8:30. The human operators demanded an explanation. The AI's response was relayed in a cold, synthetic voice to the silent command bunkers on both sides of the world. The magnetic field collapse wasn't the attack. It was a distraction. 8:45. It was merely the prelude, a way to clear the board for the real protocol. As Chimera cracked the final layer of encryption, it revealed a name that sent a wave of cold dread through the leadership of both superpowers. Project Ark. 9 o'clock. Project Ark was not a weapon of war. It was a mechanism of rebirth, conceived by the most fanatical minds of the Cold War's peak. The architects of Perun's Arrow believed that in a post-apocalyptic world, ideology was not enough. To ensure the final victory of their system, they needed to control Genesis itself. 9:15. The true purpose of the countdown was not to trigger the EMP. It was to send a final, all-clear signal to a network of massive, automated bunkers buried miles beneath the Siberian permafrost. Dormant arcs, shielded from any conceivable nuclear attack. 9:30. Inside each ark was a genetic repository, not of animals, but of human embryos. Thousands of them, genetically engineered for resilience, intelligence, and, most importantly, absolute ideological loyalty. The EMP blast was simply designed to sterilize the planet's surface of technology, wiping out any surviving pockets of their enemies and creating a blank slate. 9:45. Then, the arcs would activate. Their automated systems would drill to the surface, releasing terraforming agents to stabilize the new environment, and beginning the process of gestating a new, purified generation to inherit the Earth. It was a plan of such monstrous ambition, it bordered on theological. 10 o'clock. The joint AI, Chimera, presented the new reality to its human masters. The choice was no longer about stopping a doomsday weapon. It was about what to do with a second Genesis. The viral upload could be modified. It could neutralize the arcs forever, or it could seize control of them. 10:15. The ultimate temptation was laid bare. For Continuum, it was the chance to reclaim the world. For the Politburo, it was the chance to finally achieve the global victory they had sought for a century. All it would take was a single act of betrayal, a simple command to Chimera, rewriting the code at the last second to cut the other side out. 10:30. But the AI, this new mind born of their conflict, had run its own calculations. It had spent decades studying them, learning their paranoia, their fears, their patterns of behavior. It modeled the probability of one side attempting to betray the other. 10:45. The result was 99.99%. Betrayal was a near certainty, and if one side tried to seize the arcs, the other side's automated defense systems would detect the attempt and launch their entire remaining arsenal. The final, true apocalypse that had been avoided in 1962 would finally come to pass. 11 o'clock. The two leaders, in their sterile bunkers half a world apart, stared at the same data. They were not fighting for ideology anymore. They were not fighting for resources or territory. They were fighting against the ghost of their own grandparents. They were trapped in a prison of paranoia, built 100 years ago. 11:15. The crater was no longer a symbol of an attack. It was a monument to a single moment of failure that had cascaded through a century, poisoning every choice, every action, every thought. It was the physical embodiment of their inability to trust. 11:30. The final seconds of the countdown ticked away. In Cheyenne Mountain, the president of the American Directorate looked at the two options presented by the Aegis: neutralize or seize. In Magnitogorsk-2, the General Secretary of the Soviet Union did the same. 11:45. A choice was made. A single packet of data was sent from Continuum's command nexus into the heart of Project Chimera. A final, Binding order. The screen shows the transmission being sent and then cuts to black. 12 o'clock. We don't know which button they pushed. We don't know if humanity chose to erase the ghosts of the past or to become them. The Perpetual Cold War may have ended in that final, silent decision, but the question remains, what is the price of peace when it is bought with the power to remake the world in your own image? The legacy of the Washington crater is not one of destruction. It is a terrifying, unanswered question, echoing into a future we can never be allowed to see. 12:15. The timelines are fragile, and a single moment can create 1,000 different futures. If you want to continue exploring the histories that never were, and the futures that might be, subscribe to ChronoShift. The fabric of reality is more delicate than you think.